Well, I hope you found that interesting. I think it's a great moment, right? Because long before he says, I have a dream, and talks about the promise of America, he's actually talking about some of the problems, right? That America hasn't lived up to its potential, that it hasn't been the country that it says it is, that there are a lot of hypocrisies going on in United States society, and they have to be dealt with, right? African Americans aren't going to sit around and wait forever. They're, as we've seen, more and more challenging it everywhere, and these problems aren't going to go away until the country finally deals with it. That's kind of what the March on Washington means to a lot of people. It talks about a lot of potential, right? I have a dream, right? Things can be better, but on the other side, that they're not better right now, and that they have to be. That we can't stay where we're at. That we can't live with these Jim Crow laws, these two Americas. It has to be one America for all people the same way. All has to mean all, right? So on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a lot of Americans are now calling for change, a lot of change, right? And they don't want to wait for it any longer. It has to happen now. That's one of the important moments. They sit there and they use things like the Declaration of Independence and hold it up to Americans on national TV once again, telling Americans that all people aren't free, all people aren't being treated equal, that the United States isn't living up to its own ideals. So, how can we possibly go other places and defend other people and tell them how to be when we can't be what we say we are ourselves? The change has to come. That's kind of the important parts of the beginnings of the civil rights movement. And it's going to grow from here. The civil rights movement is going to take on challenges in a lot of other places. More and more Americans are going to get involved in it, especially younger Americans are going to be making a change. And it's fueled in part, see, we finally got to the conclusion, right? Finally made it here. This Cold War is starting to have impacts, not just in the way we live, not just in where we're involved in the world, but it's also having domestic implications. It's actually changing our way of life here in the United States. If we're going to talk about freedom, if we're going to talk about being the good guys, if we're going to talk about we're the ones that are defending human ideals, right, human rights, then we have to have them not just for people outside the United States, but for everybody in the United States as well. So those old ideas, right, that people like FDR put out there back in the 30s and 40s are coming home. That we have to deal with this now, that we can't put it off any longer. And what's helping a lot of Americans kind of come to grips with this, understand that it is a problem that has to be dealt with, is the fact that the media is bringing it into our homes. We can't ignore it. Remember how back in the beginning of the course, when we were taking a look at people like populists, people like progressives, they didn't always understand the issues because they just didn't have any contact with them. Especially for progressives, they're middle class, upper class people that lived outside, the downtown areas, the industrial parts of cities. So they didn't know how bad the working conditions were. They didn't know how bad the living conditions were for a lot of poor Americans. It wasn't until technology came along for Jacob Riis, the flash photography, that he could kind of bring these problems directly to Americans through books, through newspaper articles, through pictures in newspapers and books. And that was what especially kind of allowed Americans to connect, to kind of see that there was an issue here. Well, TV's doing the same thing in the 1950s. It's telling Americans across the country, not just in the South, not just in the North, but in the Midwest and the West, that there are issues out there, that there is a different America for different types of people in the United States. If you're black, if you're Hispanic, if you're a woman, right? There are different issues for you. That freedom isn't always there for you. That you don't have the same opportunities that everybody else has. And in a time of plenty, when the United States economy is growing so big, we feel that we're such a powerful nation, a great nation, that these are big problems for us to deal with. That they're difficult sometimes to come to terms with, to come to grips with, to make a change. Right? But as we see, Americans are coming to grips with it. They are willing to make a change. That they do want to be the country that they should be, or we say we are. And at the same time, as those changes are coming about, while the civil rights movement is winning all these victories, it's causing problems. The federal government is more and more on the side of the civil rights movement because it has to kind of win this international Cold War, to kind of put communism back on its heels, to be the good guys in this international fight. People like Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy all have to support these changes. Truman supports integrating the military. Eisenhower's integrating schools. Kennedy integrating schools, making these federal laws apply to not just some places but every place, making sure that they're being carried out. All three of those presidents want to focus on this big international threat of communism. All three of them are forced to deal with these issues inside the United States. And as that happens, as the federal government becomes more and more on the side of African Americans, of these minority groups, of these minority issues, a lot of people, especially white Southerners, start to feel that that government no longer represents them, that it's no longer doing what they want. And remember, this is an important part of that coalition that Democrats have used. People like Truman and Kennedy both get elected by white Southerners, minorities, and working class in the North. Well, now one of those groups, white Southerners, is starting to see you as the problem, right? The white Southerners no longer feel that they can rely on the Democratic Party to support them, to help them, to give them the support they need to keep their Southern way of life, the way things have been for them for generations now. Now they're going to have to start looking around for somebody that can support them, that can get on board with their agenda, to do the things that they want to do. And that's where we'll pick it up from next time. Thank you guys very much for doing this. I apologize again for the way that this was done, but hopefully you can get something out of it. There will be quite a few questions on the exam on the civil rights movement, so you will need to kind of know this stuff. Even if you want to turn off the sound and not listen to me and just look at the slides, that's great, but make sure you view this stuff. Thank you very much.